Okay, great. So, hi everyone. Thank you for watching. So, as part of Diversity in London's Leadership in Tech series, I am lucky enough to be joined by Sue Crighton, who is Head of Change at Hargreaves Lansdown. Sue will be talking about her experience as a woman in tech. So, hi Sue, thanks for joining us. So just to begin with, I'll pass over to you. Could you give us an overview on your background, like how long you've been working in tech? Yeah.
No problem at all.
No problem at all. Thanks.
So I
I
started out
started out as
an engineer.
an engineer.
Engineering.
Engineering.
I'm just going to
I'm
pause.
just
There's
going to pause.
really bad echo.
Again.
Thanks, Nausheen. So hi, everybody. So my background is that I started out life as an engineer. When I left school, I was lucky enough to get a year in industry placement at Hewlett Packard. So joined them for a year to really experience the real world of engineering, what happened, what and how it all worked, which was a fantastic grounding. And I then went on and studied systems engineering at university, which is a mix of computer science and electrical engineering. Since then, through my career, and it's been about 25 years now, I've had a variety of roles in different organizations, usually on one side of the tech line or business line. I decided fairly early on not to specialize down into deep technology, but more to do technology leadership and project and program management around technology. So I've had a lot of experiences working in very tech roles, as well as in more business change oriented roles. So my current role at Hargreaves Lansdown is head of change, and I lead a lot of our programs and delivery, which has a huge amount of tech components. My previous role, I was CTO at HSBC, and I've done a variety of different roles, but really with the common theme of using technology to solve problems and to add value to businesses.
Brilliant. Okay, great intro. So obviously, down to the nitty gritty of it, can you tell us a little bit about your experience as a woman in tech over the years?
Sure. So it has varied a bit over the years. I think when I initially started, there was definitely a novelty factor. There was, I think, certainly when I did my placement at Hewlett Packard, I think maybe one other female engineer. We're less rare now. There's more of us. There's still nowhere near enough of us, but we're a bit less rare. It's, I still find, and especially having moved up more to leadership, I'm regularly the only woman in the room. And actually, I'm used to that. And it's just how it is. My university course was 95% male. You generally get used to it. I'm very lucky in that my experiences have been very positive. I've never experienced what I would call blatant sexism. I've generally always been very, very supported. There's just always that challenge of finding your peers, finding your colleagues, the people, and I'm not saying men can't do that, because they regularly are. I've got some phenomenal colleagues who are men, but sometimes, you need that partner, the person you can sort of lean on, commiserate with, and women do tend to like having that with other women. And I think that's one of the challenges, and something that as leaders we need to sort of address. But generally speaking, I have not experienced difficulties of being a woman in tech. More, there's that sort of uniqueness, and sometimes you do get that, ta-da, we've got Sue and she's a girl, which is quite amusing.
Well, that's great to hear, that you haven't actually, experienced difficulties being a woman in tech. Are you noticing a difference between, when you first started out as a woman in tech to now being in a leadership role? Are there any major differences, or has it pretty much been the same?
I wouldn't say there's been major differences, and of course, because my own experience has matured over that time as well. I think it's definitely, on the one hand, we're less of a novelty now. There are definitely, I'm seeing more and more women in a whole variety of different technology roles, and more of us in leadership. I think when I first started out my career, it was very rare to see a woman in a senior leadership role in technology. Actually, there's a lot now. I know some fabulous women in very strong leadership roles in technology who are very inspiring. I think that's the biggest difference. We've got more role models there.
Yeah, I mean, I completely have to agree. I think it gets easier as there's more women in those roles. Just on that point, obviously you're in leadership roles. If you're in a boardroom and it's all men around you, do you get your voice heard, or do you find that a struggle? What's your thoughts on that?
It's an interesting one, and this is a conversation I've been having with my coach in terms of making sure I can get my voice heard. And there is, and it can be a female trait. I don't want to stereotype, but generally women are slightly more hesitant to speak up unless we're really confident or have all the facts. And you've generally got that little bit more hesitancy, whereas and again, I really don't want to be sexist myself in saying this, but often a more male trait is to say, actually, more confident speaking with less information. I'm learning how to get more confident in expressing my opinion, being able to stand my own ground and be myself. But what's critical to me is that in doing that, I remain authentic to me, and that I don't modify my behavior. It would be, if I modified my behavior to suit all the men in the room, then I've just lost the power of my diversity. And that is really important to me. So I think what I really try and do is when I'm in that situation, is try and make sure that my voice is heard and I get a fair standing. And to be fair, like I said, I haven't experienced real difficulty situations where people just don't want to hear from me. But I do try to retain that authenticity.
I think often they say those that speak loudest get heard. Have you ever found that yourself, or have you not had that struggle?
Yes, it is that case, and I have often got frustrated by that. And I think there's different ways of getting your voice heard, and sometimes, I think this is good advice generally for women. If you're not comfortable being the person who speaks loudest, and I'm not, I like making my point and pushing it, but I don't want to get shouty. And again, that's part of the authenticity. That's not me. But then there are other ways of building the right relationships. So, for example, at the moment, making sure I've got a trusted relationship established with our chief exec, so I can talk to him about these things if necessary, offline, getting the support. And actually, what I found, especially in my current organisation, is that people like the chief exec will naturally now come to me and say, "And Sue, what do you think?" And try to be very inclusive. So there's both angles, but I think hopefully over time we will move away from this who speaks loudest gets heard most, because that's an unhelpful culture anyway. There's a lot of people, whether they're male, female, of different minorities, who struggle to make their voice heard and don't want to be the shouty one. Doesn't mean they haven't got something worth saying. And I think as leaders, it's really important to be able to bring those voices out, whether it's women or anybody.
Yeah, absolutely. I completely agree. So on that point then, from your experience, how on board are leaders that you've dealt with to see change, and what is being done from the top to drive that change? You mentioned briefly, you kind of drew upon that they're coming to you and they're asking for your opinion, but what else are you seeing is being done?
So I think, generally speaking, and with all the organisations I've worked with, I have definitely seen a theme of people who really want to address this imbalance. And in the wider industry, I think we've seen the ratios of women on boards, women in leadership positions really grow. And there's been fantastic drives like the 30% Club and things like that. And we've seen a difference. We've really seen, you look at the board makeup of the FTSE 100, and while it's not 50-50, it's significantly better than it was 10 years ago. I think tech is still struggling with that, and part of the reason is unfortunately the pipeline. It's still the case, and I think when I went to university 25 years ago, more than that actually, it was about 20% of applicants to STEM subjects were female. It hasn't really changed. It's still the same. And so one of the things I think we do, and it's a long game, one of the really important things we've got to do is go back to the roots and actually get into schools, get into young people, encourage girls that actually tech is a really seriously cool career. And when you look at the future and all the things it can do, one of my passions is definitely how can we encourage more girls to consider STEM subjects. They don't have to do them, it doesn't suit everybody, but equally don't rule them out just because, you know, well, that's a boys thing. That's, you know, we've got to break that cycle, and that's a cultural cycle that is going to take a long time to break. So I think as leaders, there's definitely things we can do there, both in schools and the wider community. And I think there's a lot of other things we can do. There's always a very fine line in terms of positive discrimination. And it's one of those subjects I'm still not entirely sure where I sit on, because on the one hand, it's fantastic to create opportunities that women and other minorities can get into the roles where they can then have, you know, leadership, they can be role models, they can do things. But at the same time, and I know I've been in this situation before, if you know a firm is actively positively discriminating or whatever, you can get left with that self-doubt of, well, did I get the role because I'm a woman or because I'm competent? Which, you know, can then undermine you. So it's a really difficult bar for me. So I think there's an awful lot leadership can do and are doing. And I think it's, you know, it ranges from supporting the grassroots when they get role models of females in leadership roles, really supporting them. And I think one of the keys for supporting is recognizing that we're different. And actually the reason that we want to have diversity at all the different levels is not just because we're trying to hit targets and trying to be fair. It's because different types of people from different backgrounds, different genders, think differently and have a different approach. And actually there's so many studies done to say, you know, you solve problems more effectively with a diverse group of people, because, you know, you're looking at things in a different way, you're thinking about things differently. And I think we need to make sure that leadership understand that that's why we're trying to get diversity. It's not because the government have said so or certain targets have been set. This is good for your business.
Absolutely agree with you 100% there. And just talking about the secondary schools, like that's a massive thing that I'm, you know, completely passionate about as well with our Future Coders program, which is how, you know, we've got in contact. So getting to the roots of grassroots is completely what needs to be done. Well, one of the things that needs to be done. You mentioned about D&I targets and that some, you know, it's more than just throwing in D&I targets. Have you been in organisations that have had strict kind of D&I targets, and from those, what behaviours have you seen come about from them? Obviously, you briefly mentioned positive discrimination, but what other behaviours have you seen come from those, and how do we improve this? Do we get rid of targets completely? What should be done here?
It's a really difficult one, and again, and I won't name organisational names. One of the organisations I worked with was genuine, and it came from a very, very good place. They were genuinely trying to increase the number of women in technology, and really say, what can we do? How do we get them? And so they put some very specific targets. So they had management targets on your sort of, you know, your mix of different levels. So at different grades, they'd set targets, but they also put in a policy that said you can't proceed to interview unless you've got a 50-50 balanced interview pipeline with male and female applicants. Now in technology, that's incredibly difficult. And on the one hand, it drove some great behaviours because it drove the use of things like Textio to say, you know, are we making sure that our role profiles and adverts really appeal to women? And so it made us think about those things. It made us think about where we're advertising, what we're doing, where we can go and tackle and find more applicants. But it also drove poor behaviours on, but I need to get on with this, right? Those two who've applied are females, I'll stuff them in. And, you know, it's very down to the individuals, but I always worry about putting hard and fast targets on there and making it difficult. Ultimately, you've got to get people who really want and see the benefit of having that diverse team. And actually, if you get the leaders who genuinely understand that by having a diverse team, they will have a more successful, more productive team, then you will drive all the right behaviours through. And so I think it's really incumbent on us as leaders. Targets can help, but they can also hinder.
I also, on that point, I also think that the targets can be quite like we need to hit those now, whereas I think diversity and inclusion is a long-term process that isn't going to happen overnight just by putting it in stats.
There's no quick fix, and you know, there is danger as well. And you know, I've got a lot of colleagues, as you'd expect, who are middle-aged white men. And, you know, there is a danger that they become the endangered species. And it's kind of like suddenly, well, you can't get a job because, well, look at you, you know, you're far too, we've got too many of you, we need this. And actually,
so yes, so yeah, sorry.
I was just, there's a danger. There's the other flip side. I've got a lot of colleagues, as you'd expect, who are middle-aged white men, and the danger is that we start discriminating against them. And from my perspective, the key thing when I'm building out a leadership team is finding the balance and understanding the different thinking. And it's never quite as clean cut as men or women and or other minorities. It's more, it's the personalities, it's the mix, it's the background, different things. And I think as leaders, you know, targets will force us down a certain, more women, more Asian people, more whatever. Whereas actually we've got to find the balance, and we've got to recognize what's needed for our organization, for our teams. That for me is part of grown-up leadership.
Yeah, so so just to wrap up, what would you say, a couple of questions, so what would you say every leader should be doing across D&I, just to kind of summarize? What do you think every leader should be doing?
So I think we should regularly be questioning our biases, and that's all of us. We've all got biases in there. I do too. And the more we can make those conscious, the more we can make sure that we're not introducing those into our interviewing or CV review. I think working hard to get more diverse applicants to roles to give you more to choose from, which will sometimes mean, you know, going to different places, maybe pitching a slightly non-traditional role, or sort of looking at, you know, what are the different ways that you could attract more diverse talent. And I think as well as that, there's really supporting the minority people you have. I don't just mean women, where you've got someone who is, you know, either alone or in a small group, making sure that they've got the right support. To your point earlier, making sure that their voice gets heard, and checking back in, you know, do you have something to say, bringing them into it. So it's really that sort of, you know, high emotional intelligence, understanding how to bring people into those roles, but also how to make them successful in those roles and thrive in there. And then, you know, we'll stay, we'll be role models, we'll bring more people behind us, and the world will all be happier.
Just finally, how, because this is something that I know a lot of people that I speak to wonder is, what actually attracts I mean, obviously you're just one woman, but what would you say attracts women to an organisation? So if they're looking to apply to a company, what kind of things would they look at to determine whether that's an organisation they would want to work at? Would it be things like policies, like parental policies and flexible working? What do you think?
It's a difficult one because I think it's always going to be very individual depending on people's circumstances. But for me, very much, it's about culture. It's about sort of how that works. We spend so long at work. It's, you know, you want to be able to feel like you fit in, like you're going to have colleagues who are friends. I mean, you know, hopefully one day we'll be able to go for after work drinks again.
Yeah.
But for me, there's a sort of series, the culture of the organization and how they treat people is really important. Also the nature of the work, and that challenge. I love being challenged. I get very bored with routine. So for me personally, I'll be looking at sort of, you know, the culture, the challenge, the can I add value? Can this inspire me? But what I'd really encourage, I think, because that's such a personal thing for anyone, is almost taking the time, if you're job searching, taking the time to think about what is important to you. What are the things, you know, if things like parental leave policies are very important because that's the stage of life you're in, then absolutely that's one of the things to look at. If, you know, it's actually important to be able to build, you know, a social network, to feel that you're part of work, or if it's much more about progressing your career, I would just encourage people to be very aware of what they want from a job. Because jobs are two-way. I mean, you know, absolutely we add value to the organization, but it's for us as well. You can't spend that long doing something and not feel excited by it or enjoy it.
I can absolutely completely agree. I mean, there's things, policies and things that you can put in place, but I think a sense of belonging, culture, having a voice, are things that are coming up repeatedly. So yeah, I think that you've got some really great points there. So thank you so much for giving, you know, providing that insight and your thoughts. That was great. Thank you so much, Sue.
Anytime at all. I enjoyed it.
Cheers. Thank you.